I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. Why is it that every time we go to the store, it seems like the price of anything we try to buy, that has gone up big time. There's been a significant increase in the cost of pretty much everything we try to buy, and a significant decrease in the purchasing power of that dollar in your pocket. But why is it? Why is it that anytime we go to our local supermarket, our local grocer, if we try to buy a dozen eggs, it seems like that price has gone up big time? Why is it that whenever we try to buy a gallon of milk, that has gone up? Or whenever we try to fill up our car, the cost of a gallon of gas, that has gone up significantly. But it goes beyond that. It seems like everywhere the price has gone up. If you try to buy a home, interest rates are up. The purchasing price of a house is up. If you try to rent a property, that has gone up big time as well. If you have to provide electricity, which everybody does, right? The cost of that electrical usage, that has gone up. The cost of providing gas to your home, that has gone up as well. Again, it seems like everything costs more. And we know what the answer is. It's inflation. Inflation has been all over the news for the past couple of years because it's been a serious part of our conversation. And it impacts the vast majority of people. Now you hear a couple of sides of this story. You hear that the economy is doing well. Unemployment is down. People are getting raises. And if you look at the stock market, that has hit historic highs. So we should be happy with the economy the way it is. And we shouldn't really pay attention to what's taking place with inflation. But then you hear the stories of people who say they cannot afford to feed their families. They cannot afford to purchase the same amount of food that they used to with the money they're bringing in today, even if they got a raise over the past couple of years. Now, how's that possible? You get a raise, you think you're making more money, so you should theoretically be able to purchase more goods. But that's not always the case, especially when you start taking into consideration inflation. Let's try to break it down. We've had about, on average, a 20% increase in inflation over the past few years. Some years have been more, some years have been less. But a 20% increase is significant. It's averaging anywhere about 4 to 5% per year. So unless you're getting a raise every year that's more than 4 to 5%, or that's higher than inflation, you're really not making more money. The purchasing power of the dollars you're making doesn't go as far. So which story is true? Is it true that the economy is doing well? That we look at the stock market and it's at an all-time high? Or is it true that inflation is dragging down so many people? And if that's true, then why are some people oblivious to it? Well, the answer to that question is that the reality for each individual is different. If you are a multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire, you're doing pretty good. The rise in the stock market is most likely helping you. And you probably already have some of the main things that you're gonna buy. You probably already own your home, you probably already have the car you're gonna drive. And the increase in the cost of a dozen eggs or the cost of a gallon of milk is not really felt by you. But then on the opposite side, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, then whenever there's an increase in the cost of any product that you're trying to buy, that is something you feel. You feel it directly. And then a lot of people are oblivious to it because guess what? We all have a lot of things that we have to focus on. And some people, a good portion of society, live in that middle ground where they are not really directly, immediately impacted by inflation. They might see the prices go up, but it doesn't really impact them as much. And they may not be fully aware that it's having such a negative impact on them in the long term. So what I want to do in this video is talk about what it is that we can do to try to deal with this situation of inflation. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, there's a lot of things we have absolutely no control over. We're not in charge of government policy. We're not in charge of how much it costs to ship items from one side of the world to the other. How much does it cost to excavate or to mine for some of the minerals that's needed in order to produce some of the technologies we have. We're not in charge of monetary policy. We're not in charge of how our government spends our money. And if you're working for a regular company, you're not necessarily in charge of how much money you make. Yeah, you take a job, you take a wage, and you might get bonuses, you might get raises, but you don't really set the policy in terms of how and when you get that bonus or raise. But there are a few things that you are in control over. You're in control of your overall budget. You're in control of how you spend your money, what you spend your money on, how you prioritize your spending. But just trying to save your way out of this inflation situation, it's a losing battle because you could only save but so much money. There comes a point that you're not able to save anything, and if you're not able to dip into your savings to offset the increase in prices of buying something, that's going to take over, and that's going to make it a lot more difficult for you as a person. So even though we're being told the economy is doing great, the stock market is doing great, unemployment is low, people are getting raises, and we're being told there's nothing to see here, my advice to everybody is don't get gaslighted. And really, the only thing that we can do is try to find a way to make more money. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. You can take part in the gig economy. There's a lot of people doing it, whether you're driving for Uber, for Lyft, if you're doing DoorDash, if you're doing Grubhub, or if you're doing any of those other type of gig economy type jobs that allow you to, use your time to make more money. But think about it. Doing some of those gigs, they require you to have a car. You have to maintain your car. You have to gas up your car. You have to do things to your car to make it functional, right? You have to make sure it works properly, which means you probably, especially if you're doing Uber or Lyft, you probably have to clean your car more often than you would normally do. I mean, you do want to get that 5-star review. So you're constantly cleaning your car. You're constantly making sure it is running smoothly. It's top notch. It's efficient. It's always gassed up. You want to make sure that it's functional. That's an investment right there. That's a financial investment. But it's another way to make money. Now, another thing you could do is try to create something. Try to create something physical, a physical good that you can sell, either in person or online. Now, that has its pros and cons. If you're dealing with physical goods, you have to deal with inventory, you have to deal with shipping. And there's a lot of things that go into that as well. There's a lot of costs that go into that. Shipping costs are factored in as well. That's why I tend to recommend selling digital goods, whether it's a PDF, an ebook, if you're trying to create digital art that you could sell. If you're providing digital services, maybe you're working from home, you could build websites for people. Or you could do one of my favorites, which is to sell WordPress themes. Now, why is it that I like selling WordPress themes? And how does that differ from creating a website for somebody? Well, the reality is, if you're creating a website for somebody, you can make a good amount of money very fast. You can build a website for about $2,000, and that's real money coming in really quick. And if you know what you're doing, you could build websites relatively fast. It's not that difficult to do once you have the know-how. The hardest part is finding the clients. But again, you're trading your time for money. Let's say it costs you 10 hours of time in order to build that website, or 15 hours of back and forth, calling your customers, calling your clients, and getting their feedback on any of your new designs. And that can take a lot of time. That's a lot of back and forth. Yes, money is good. You could do this on the side as a side hustle. You're still working your 9 to 5, you're doing this after hours, you're making connections online, you're finding people who need the type of service you're offering. But then you gotta actually do the service, you gotta provide the service. And that can take a good amount of time. Now, developing themes, you put in all the effort up front, right? You design the theme, you develop the theme, you put it up, you package it, and you provide it for sale on your website. The beauty there is you work on it. In the beginning, you put in all the time and effort, but then you put it for sale, and as long as your website is up, as long as you can market your services, the only limitation to the amount of money you're going to make is how many people are visiting your website. And guess what? Your website should be up 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. And in that situation, your website could be selling your themes an unlimited amount of times. And then really what you got to do is just maintain the code. Make sure it stays current, make sure it stays up to date, and make sure you spend a good amount of time marketing your theme. So I tend to like digital products for that reason. Same thing could be said about ebooks. Same thing could be said about digital art. Same thing could be said about, creating music. You can go on some of these platforms like Epidemic or any of the other ones. And if you're a music creator, you can sell your music right there. And this is valuable because, again, the reality is there's not much that we could do about inflation. Inflation is going to go up. Monetary policy dictates that. The Feds, as a matter of fact, they want inflation to go up. They want inflation to be a constant, but they generally want it to be at about 1 to 2% per year. No less than that, no more than that. That is what the Feds consider to be healthy inflation. That means people are making more money. That means the cost of products are generally increasing a little bit. That means that the markets are in a healthy situation. Anything more than that, and then we have situations where people are going to be negatively impacted. Anything less, and then we have deflation taken into effect. And that means that your dollar has too much purchasing power. And now that might sound good, right? It might sound good to say, well, now my dollar could buy 10 times more. Well, think about it. That's also a negative because that means that it's going to devalue your currency. You're going to have a situation where you're competing with so many different people to buy limited goods and services. And then you're going to have an effect where you're going to start going into inflation because what's going to happen is that supply and demand comes into effect. If there's very little supply and extremely high demand, what happens? Now, when it comes to inflation, this is what they call the demand pull inflation effect. The demand for goods and services is so high that it causes the cost of that product to increase. And then there's also the cost push effect in inflation, where the cost of producing that product you're trying to purchase, that increases, whether it's the shipping of it, the manufacturing of it, sourcing the minerals, getting the minerals sent from one place to another. The cost of labor. If the cost of labor increases, who pays for that? I mean, just take a look at California. There's a whole entire debate on the minimum wage, and it's an ongoing debate. It's been a debate that's been happening for years. And a normal increase in the minimum wage is actually not a bad thing. But once you start having drastic increases, that's going to have an immediate impact on businesses. Businesses have to figure out how they're going to balance their budget. And sometimes they're able to absorb it. Sometimes they can say, you know what, it's just $1 increase, a $2 increase. We could absorb that. But if it's a $4, $5, $10 increase, now that could be a little bit more unmanageable. I don't want to touch the minimum wage conversation too much because it's different for everybody in every location, right? Because if you are making $10 an hour in New York City, you could barely survive. Same thing in California. But if you're making $10 an hour in some other areas where the cost of living is so much lower, then you're actually probably doing okay. Now, if you increase it to about $20 an hour, let's say the federal government decides they want to increase the minimum wage to $20 an hour across the board in the entire United States. Well, $20 an hour to somebody in California, New York is not the same $20 for somebody in another smaller town. So it's an ongoing debate. But the reality is, if you increase the cost for a business to do business, they're going to pass on the cost of that increase to the consumer, to the purchaser. And you can feel that in the fast food industry, in the quick service industry. And then this is also why government has such a huge impact on what's taking place with inflation. If the government is spending so much money, if they're spending money on situations taking place worldwide, that has an impact in a lot of different ways when it comes to the safety and shipping. What you're going to notice is a lot of these increases are taking place because a lot of the shipping industry has to go around a different route, a safer route, than they previously had to because of conflict taking place. So now if they have to travel an extra 1,000 or 2,000 nautical miles, that's more oil they're using, more gas they're using, that's more time that it takes to get that product to you. And some products are perishable. Some products are long shelf lives. So if a product is perishable, you got to kind of get that product there faster, which means you have to have expedited shipping. And expedited shipping takes priority, so it costs more. So all these factors, they impact inflation, they impact the economy. And in some places like New York City, the cost of services that the city provides has gone up substantially over the past few years. And there's another hot button reason for that. But that's a topic that goes beyond the scope of this video. Well, what I'm saying is that increase in spending by government has a direct impact in our bottom lines. Now, one thing you're going to hear often is the fact that people say that it's greedy companies, the reason why we have inflation, the reason why we have shrinkflation, the reason why it costs so much more to buy something. Well, is that really the case? Now, one easy way to figure that out is that if the inflationary effect is only being felt in one location or a small jurisdiction, a small area, or in one area of manufacturing or one area of services or products that are being sold. If it's only being felt in one sector, then yeah, you could probably attribute it to, corporate greed. Because remember, a company's main goal is to make money. But a company doesn't necessarily make money if nobody could afford to buy their goods or services. They would tend to go out of business. And a lot of companies, they make their money by trying to sell a product as cheaply as possible, as affordable as possible, to try to make money on the margins. Now let's look at a basic example, a very simple, oversimplified example. Let's say a company has a $20 widget that they have a $10 profit margin on. They're selling it to you for $20. They're profiting about $10. At that price point, let's say they have 1,000 or 2,000 customers. They're profiting at that point anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000. But now let's say another company sells the same widget for $10 and they have a profit margin of about $5. Same widget, different company. Smaller profit margin, let's say $5 because they found efficiencies in manufacturing or efficiencies in production, or they found different materials they could use for it. And now let's say the market for that is about 5,000 to 10,000 people. Now they're making about $25,000 profit or about $50,000 profit. Their profit margin goes up. Now that's a very oversimplified example, and it might not be the best example, but it's an example that shows that sometimes companies have an incentive to lower the price. So the way to determine is it corporate greed is to look at the fact, is it happening locally? Is it happening in just one sector? Or as in this case, is it happening worldwide? And if you look all over the world, every major nation, every major country is having an issue of inflation. Some areas are in the double digits. And again, it goes back to factors that we generally have no control over. But how do the feds measure inflation? Well, they measure it based on the consumer price index and the producer price index. Basically, in layman terms, what that means is that they take a basket of goods and they determine over time what the pricing of that is in terms of food, energy, housing, things of that nature, healthcare, education, and they determine what does that look like every month, month over month, and then they release inflation report based on that. But one of the things they don't take into consideration, ironically, for the core index is the cost of food and energy. And the reason why is because it's so volatile. But wait a minute, food is something that we need to survive. Energy is something we need to survive as well. So if you don't include that, then inflation is actually kind of higher. Now remember, they have the regular inflation that they do report on, but the core index of inflation is something that's promoted in the media most often. And that's what excludes certain areas that everyday consumers like you and I are generally impacted by. And then of course they take into consideration the producer's price index. What does it cost for a company, a manufacturer, to produce a product? And over time they determine, has that price gone up or has it gone down? So yeah, the topic of inflation, it's a tough one. It's one you're going to hear about ongoing for years to come. We know why it's happened because over the past few years, we've had some really significant impacts in the way we function as society. There's been a lot of printing of money. There's been a lot of spending of money. And with so many things that are outside of our control, we have to start focusing on what we do control. And that is what we can produce ourselves. Now, we all have 24 hours in a day. So there's only so much time that you could spend at a physical job. Now, some people are very good and they can do remote work and they can work for more than one company remotely at the same time. So it's kind of like having two full-time jobs. And you heard a lot about that over the past few years. But there's been a crackdown on that. There's been a lot of innovation in the way that companies are tracking how their remote employees are working. So if you only have 24 hours in a day, how can you make more money? You can ask your boss for a raise. You could ask for a bonus. You could ask for a cola. And I'm not talking about the soft drink. I'm talking about a cost of living adjustment. That's an increase in your wage based on the cost of living. But not every employer is going to grant you that. They're not going to always say yes to that. They might give you a small raise. But is it enough to keep up with the rising cost of purchasing a dozen eggs, a gallon of milk, a gallon of gas, housing increases, electricity increases, everything that seems to be going up? And sometimes you don't even see it or feel it because of shrinkflation. That's where the price stays the same, but they sell you less of a product. Actually, that happened to me recently where I like buying these Kodiak pancakes because they're high protein. So I would get the largest container I could possibly get. But I noticed they shrunk down the actual product itself in terms of how many ounces or how much of that product is actually in there. But they kept the price the same. So that's shrinkflation. That means you have to replenish that more often. So again, a lot of stuff that we have no control over. But what you do have control over is what you do to try to make additional money. Maybe you're going to start a side hustle. Like I said, maybe you're good at art. Maybe you can create some digital products that you could sell. Maybe you're good at creating music that you can join some of these platforms. Maybe you're a writer, so you can start blogging, or maybe you could write an ebook and you could sell that. I think that's an extremely beneficial way to make more money because, again, your time is limited, you don't have that much of it, but you have to try to deal with the increased cost of goods. And with limited hours in a day, how can you maximize that? Selling digital products versus selling services is gonna potentially make you more money. Maybe you could do both. I'm a big proponent for myself and people who are coders in providing website services. You can be a freelancer, you can join your local chamber of commerce. You can get an influx of clients so that way you can get maybe once a month you get a $2,000, client. You could build a website for them for $2,000. And at the same time, you could develop themes. That's what I do. You create a theme, you set it on your website is live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. 366 this year because it is a leap year. But basically, your website is selling your product all the time, even while you sleep. So in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that there's things that we have control over, and there's a small amount of that. And there's a lot of things we have no control over. But it seems like we focus on the things we have no control over. I don't have control over government policy. I don't have control over monetary policy. I don't have control over diplomatic relations worldwide. I don't have control over the cost of a barrel of oil. And while I do have control over my budget, I could try to save as much, and I've done that too. One of the best investments I made was 21 solar panels on top of my house. That has kept my electricity costs down to zero, at a time that utility companies are raising the cost of electricity. So that's a major savings right there. So there's things within our budget we can do, but you really can't always save your way out of these inflationary situations. You gotta make more money. And if you want to learn how to code a custom WordPress theme, that's something I teach here on YouTube. I have a whole bunch of videos on that. And you can go to my website and you can learn more about custom WordPress theme development. Or maybe you can make some shirts like this. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. You can sell t-shirts, start a Teespring account, or any of these other type of accounts you can set up with another party, where they enable you to design and develop a t-shirt, and you can sell it from their platform. And that way you don't have to deal with any inventory. So yeah, maybe you can even sell t-shirts like this. They're cool sayings. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. There's a lot of ways to make extra money, and it seems like that's the only area that we have more control over. So that's how you deal with inflation. I know, easier said than done, but what choice do we have? All right, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification icon. If you want to support the channel, head on over to my website, purchase a copy of DevWP. It's how I teach people how to code a custom WordPress theme. And definitely check out a bunch of my videos that I have on that. And as always, thanks for watching, and happy coding.